Jonathan, you are live.
I am live.
It's all you.
A wall appeared over here.
It's so strange.
Hey. Ooh. All right, let's see if anybody else shows up.
Pretty sure Janelle will show up.
Yes.
All right. Time to. Apple man.
Yeah.
I have to have an Ethernet dongle even for my non-Apple machine.
It's all their fault.
Have you seen this?
Oh, I love those things.
Violently out of spec.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it seems to work.
Yeah. No, all those turns make you go faster. You know
That's
how
not the
that
problem.
works.
It's not twisted. It's just like flat wire. Keep distances short.
Which session did you go to first?
The DWeb,
Oh, the distributed web stuff. Yeah.
which was kind of entertaining because there's some bellhead guy who's like inspired by a book that I read written in the 80s that was like the bellhead still fighting TCP/IP, and like it's like, oh my god, it's 2018 and people are still on about this. And he kind of tried to monopolize the session.
Hello.
Hello.
Hopefully,
makes-
some more folks show up here.
I know.
May not make sense to run the demo, but
Yeah.
I haven't seen
set
it.
up for it anyway. Well, there's no projector.
No, I know. Yeah.
Well,
We
if
can all
it's
huddle
just-
around
if
my
it's
laptop.
just
Yeah, if
Jonathan.
it's just the three of us.
Yeah.
No, she's already seen it.
Well, even if there's just 2 or 3 more, then we could still hold it around your laptop. It'd be totally
Yeah. Where this thing has a power plug on it somewhere. Oh, there it is.
Ah, the ever disposable Raspberry Pi 3. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, dude, this is a huge improvement from my previous business where I was lugging like 500 pounds of
Switches,
switches
yeah,
around to do
forgot about
demos. I'll take it.
Yeah.
I was curious what your thoughts on that last.
I read that book.
Okay.
Hey,
And it's like, I got with the Bellhead like in the first 100 pages, and it didn't get any better. They're still relitigating the 70s.
I'm noticing there's a temperature gradient. I was just in the other row
Yeah.
there.
Oh,
It's
is it
much
really
warmer.
hot?
It was-
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would like to be here.
Yes. Nice and cool, comparatively speaking.
Oh, you brought a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, I'm set up to demo it. I'm not sure it makes sense or not to actually run the demo versus just talking it through because, the upshot of the demo is here's me sending an email. Here's me like pointing my iMac client at the Raspberry Pi. Look, the email came through. Spam assassin processed it.
Yay!
In some audiences, people are like, wow, it actually works.
Yeah.
But I think everyone here understands how that works.
So you are pretending that your LAN is actually wired.
So I've actually plugged in. This thing does have Wi-Fi, but it's a pain to get the Wi-Fi password on it, and it doesn't have the most reliable Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So what I do is I actually then IP masquerade through my laptop, which has pretty good Wi-Fi, and it's sort of easy to get the password in it because it has a keyboard. But this is just for demo purposes. I mean, the interesting thing is the network overlay in this that your cell phone uses to talk to the actual Raspberry Pi works through like quadruple NAT. Like it is surprising the sort of insane networks that thing can punch through. Like we were traveling around Southeast Asia for a while last year, and like you see some weird stuff on cell networks there, like where you're behind 3 layers of NAT, and it's never seemed to have a problem.
My answer when somebody asks about when we finally going to get IPv6, I was answered the future of networking is what you just described, not IPv6.
Oh, really? Well, I mean, at this point, my home network is about 1/3 by bytes IPv6 traffic coming from the internet. So it's getting there, which is like radically better than 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it'd be like 1%. So yeah, progress. So it's going to probably be a while. I was hopeful that the Indias and Chinas of the world building out their cell networks would drive this, and in India it did, and in China it did not. And I do not understand what went wrong.
I haven't gotten the one, but I would love to have one Wikipedia page or something that describes the state of the art with respect to what the shenanigans are everybody does.
Actually,
I haven't looked recently, but I looked.
I didn't do any shenanigans. Like the way I found out I had IPv6 was I was like, looking up my IP address or something. So I typed, "What's my IP?" into Google.
Oops,
that's a lot bigger than I was expecting.
Good Lord. Just what we need.
So I mean, these days, if you have a reasonably modern router and a reasonably modern version of Mac OS, Linux, or Windows, it just works.
Yeah, pretty much. That's funny. I use like one of those ad blocking DNS kind of things. It's basically Zscaler.
Pi-hole.
Well, that's what I was using, but now Eero, like my mesh Wi-Fi, they have one that I don't have to maintain, and I'm just like, yes, I'll give you the money. I don't want to do that. And they just route all your DNS traffic through Zscaler, basically, and it just blocks all the ads. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But it doesn't support V6. So.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so you have, it basically falls back to my V6 name servers. And then I don't get the ad blocking.
Sure.
Which is annoying. So apparently they're adding it, but it's,
It seems weird to ship software. I mean, the company, when the company was formed, it would have been weird to ship without IPv6 support.
Yes. I don't know, who knows? V6 is one of those things that I feel like is just like forever going to be like, oh, we're almost there.
There has to be a tipping point at some point where like it's enough that you can reasonably be a V6 only.
Yeah.
And then once a sufficient number of people are V6 only, then the content side will flip.
Yes.
Like that.
So for what it's worth, all of the sessions will be recorded and the content will be put up somewhere on the wiki. So for people who can't be here or whatever, they can still see. Well, not so much watch your mouth. I'm saying we should still put notes on in spite of the small crowd, we should put notes up because there will be people who consume this after.
So I've had on.
Yeah, so get in the Etherpad, add yourself to the list.
What's the?
It is etherpad.indieweb.org/indiehosting.
Is case matter here?
No, maybe. It's all lowercase, so don't use case, I guess. I don't know.
I did camel case, and it seems to have worked.
Okay. Well,
Indie Hosting. There's a company called Indie Hosting, right?
There is a company called Indie Hosting.
Are they affiliated with IndieWeb?
No.
Yeah.
I think loosely.
I wrote that on the thing because they said you needed a hashtag.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it's all good.
Actually, in the hosters, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So when's this session supposed to start?
A couple minutes ago, 5 minutes ago. Yeah.
Okay. I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Maybe we should turn this to more of a roundtable.
Yes.
But I can't talk about. I'll talk through the system that we've built briefly as an overview, and then we can.
Yeah, because I actually have a series of questions that I think would be interesting, which I may have already asked, but
Excellent. We need a heckler. Okay, so I was going to poll people on some questions, but I think that might be pointless.
yes.
Yes. I think you know the room pretty well.
Oh, actually, I will ask one question just because I want to see what John says. Who here used to run their own mail server but stopped?
I have never run my own mail
Oh, you
server.
didn't?
Never.
Oh,
No.
wow.
Wait, no,
Wait.
I did. And I stopped. It's those things you remember. It's like, gosh, it didn't take long for me to quit. I did, very briefly.
You know, I seem to figure and send mail, but I don't remember why. I have the book somewhere.
It could have been a smart host config.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, SendMail in particular. So that gives you a case of kind of when I normally do this, it's often to a technical crowd, people who either have in the past or could run their own email, but choose not to because it's a lot of work and they have kids and jobs and that stuff stopped being fun at some point. But there are kind of other motivations other than like nerdery to want to kind of post your own email in your house. For one, it has much stronger Fourth Amendment protections. It's two guys in suits showing up with a piece of paper at a big data center hosted by some big company threatening to shut the place down. They're probably going to roll over.
Yep.
And you're never even going to hear about it. Whereas if they knock down your front door, it's pretty hard to hide that.
Yeah.
And your neighbors are going to notice too. But the bigger, I think, in my mind, issue is the incentives. So, if you're running your email on hardware you own in your own home, using power you pay for, no one has that need to monetize you because you're not costing anyone any money. And so my theory actually is that even if you don't care that much about the privacy aspect, in time it will result in a better experience. Because there's all these ads are the obvious ones, creepy tracking, and just all the dark patterns that get used. Like the I agree to your horribly abusive terms of service button is this giant green thing with unicorns running around it, and then in the bottom corner it's in grayed out text no thanks.
Yeah.
And I think you remove a lot of the incentive to do things like that. If they're not trying to figure out how to make the money you're costing them back.
Right.
Well, I'd like to have a long-term archive on my email. I would have liked to basically, I think I have about 18 years or something worth of email, but it sort of stops around there. And I probably have another 8 years before that I used email,
Yeah.
but I don't have that. Practically speaking, there was no way for me to keep that.
Sure.
And once I have that, then I could also do, conceivably somebody could write some code to do analytics, for example, on it that I'd like to see, that I cannot get from somebody's hosting service.
But I want that code running on my hardware, doing analytics for me.
That's true, but practically speaking, the kind of analytics I want to do, Google's not going to implement because they're specific to me. I want to do my own kind of thing, right? And I'd also like to merge, for example, my social network in my email base with the other social networks. And given that my set of social networks is different from other people's kind of set of networks, it has to be more locally controlled. So there's a ton of things that I could do if I had that locally that has nothing to do with privacy.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's tempting to over-focus on privacy, especially given the events of the past year or two. But I absolutely think there are other important advantages. So,
for example, I'd like to know all the people who email me send me the too long emails on a consistent basis.
So you can filter them, low priority.
Just a word count, just an average word count.
Yeah.
It shows up With every time you get an email from this person, you're like, oh, your average email word count is.
Bloviator.
Yeah. And in that way, conceivably, I could come up with a scheme by which my email inbox gets prioritized the way it makes sense to me.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of room to improve the experience of using email.
So just for me to understand, what you're focusing on is basically the plumbing part, not so much the UI.
Especially initially, it's very much on, I mean, from my perspective, I want this thing to have as little UI as I can get away with, because the most intuitive UI is one that's not there. There has to be a little bit, you have to be able to like enter your Wi-Fi password, and
Right. But when you talk about email, you're assuming that people continue to use existing email clients. It's just pointed at the home server as opposed to.
Yeah, I mean, your existing email IMAP clients, it needs a webmail, and so either they're open source webmails of varying quality. Fortunately, my observation is most people now use their phone as their primary email device. Like, this group aside, most people fall into that category. So, you still need a webmail interface, but it's not as crucial to have a really awesome one as it was, say, 10 years ago. I think having just a decent one is probably good enough for most people. But I mean, the motivation is to basically, so I was reading some of the IndieWeb wiki, and so there's the concept of generations. And I think one of the things that's unusual here is I'm actually targeting kind of a generation 5, which is even past the one that IndieWeb is explicitly not interested in yet.
Yeah.
It's like people like my sister who don't even have a computer. Like, she uses her phone as her sole communication and computing device, and perfectly happy.
Yeah.
Like, before this, she used nothing.
Yeah.
And so, aiming the kind of technical competence required level at that class of users, makes it a lot more challenging, obviously, but I think greatly increases the impact you could have. So that ends, like, a lot of self-hosting stuff guides, it's like step 1, install Linux. That's like, my sister's not installing Linux.
Your system doesn't know what Linux is.
She does, but that's mainly just because John and I were ranting about it around her in the 90s. So yeah, I mean, obviously the software administration has to be comparable to using a cell phone. In fact, it needs to work through a cell phone. Obviously, if your house burns down, email continuity is obviously your number 1 priority, so that has to be handled. And so the solution is the data is backed up, gigabyte, getabyte style. Like, you store encrypted bits for me, I'd store encrypted bits for you.
Cool.
And you and 100,000 of your closest friends are all backing each other up.
Now that functionality, that I'm assuming that's part of the plumbing you're building. Is that specific to email, or is it for all of the data? I'm just starting with email. The basic idea is to create a platform. Right. And so solve all the platform problems so that building apps on it is just delivering the app. Like, if I'm building a WordPress, I'm building a blog app for this, I set up WordPress with all the right plugins, everything just pre-configured, and I don't have to worry about backup. I don't have to worry about, getting network access, punching through NATs, getting secure connectivity.
So you would build this because there's a whole bunch of stuff around, right? Storage and.
I looked at a bunch. There's a bunch that store the consensus metadata on a blockchain, usually Ethereum.
No, I mean actual storage systems for distributed backup. Like storage, for example, which is going through a rewrite currently, but basically, and there's this, whatever this coin is, it's what you do is you go to the website, sign up for an account, you buy whatever the coin is, I forgot what its name was, something with A.
Filecoin is one, SIA is another.
SIA, that's
there's Storage A is another, and there's one more I can't remember right now.
That's the infrastructure is already being built, so why couldn't you just pull that in?
So I evaluated all those. The biggest one had like a couple hundred terabytes under management, and transactions would take like 20 seconds to complete. And by transactions, I mean like file upload and file download. Actually, file download is faster, but file upload, there's like a bidding process that happens on the blockchain, bid for storage, and like that's just not fast. Yeah. I I hope one of these systems becomes complete, fast, reliable, all of that, but we're clearly not there yet. I looked at a couple of others. There's Perkeep, yeah. But
that's something different.
Yeah, and nothing was a real good fit. It's not strictly backup. Basically, what happens is you take a snapshot of the file system, you push all the changes up to the global file system. When you're done, you take another snapshot and push them. So you're just always kind of keeping right up. But the other side is that if the house burns down, you don't download all of your data immediately. It just kind of demand pages it in from the global side. And eventually, I think the local storage that's not being used as encrypted backup for other people turns into just a cache, a subset of the data.
Okay, so then what you're building here is something that doesn't exactly behave like a file system.
Yeah, it's similar to a file system, but not.
Okay, so if I fast forward here and everything comes the way I sort of think, I guess how you want it to be, then applications will build against some API that's sort of like a file system, but not quite, and that doesn't exist today.
You could. I think the semantics are close enough to a file system that I think it probably generally makes sense just to use it as a file system. I mean,
and you would demand fetch files from all over. I'm thinking, some kind of mailbox storage for email, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And there's some directory hierarchy that somebody came up with. Now here I have a new device because the house burned down, and now I'm looking for emails from you. Now, what exactly happens if you sort of demand swapping in these pieces? That's not a trivial operation.
Yeah, I mean, you do read ahead. You do, you can keep working set estimates in the backup as well, and you download those first, and then you start just proactively pulling in stuff that used to be part of your working set first, and then pull in other stuff later. When I say a cache, a lot of times people are like, oh, so you have a gig that's caching some stuff, and then you have 10 terabytes out there. It's more like you have a terabyte, and it's got a terabyte and a half out there.
Right. Okay.
So not radical global file system. It should. The overwhelming majority of requests should be served. Should be handled locally.
Right, except for the recovery case that you were talking about. Yeah.
Well,
and in that case, that's you pull back in the old working set first, in priority order, so that the things you've used recently will start working first.
Well, and email is a classic example of this exact look, the big mail providers. I used to work for one, so you would not store everything locally or everything on your best. You wouldn't have a single type of storage that has all of your email in it, because that's not cost effective, right? Because 99% of the email people don't read. They read, what is in my inbox, and then everything else is a distant afterthought.
You look at once a year.
Most. And literally, if you go click on Yahoo Mail and you go and look at mail from 5 years ago, it's not going to be pulling that off of the same location that it's pulling the email out in your inbox.
Just for curiosity, where does it pull up?
Tapes, believe it or not. Sometimes.
In really extreme cases.
In really extreme cases, right. Mostly what it really means is spinning disks that sometimes are spun down. And, literally they'll have archival storage where the drives are just sitting there idle, right? And they'll spin up the drive on demand, mount it, then go find the file and pull it out. And that's okay to 10 seconds to fetch that file, because you're only fetching it once every 8 years, right? Absolutely. Which is, I think, what's sort of driving your
But so it seems to me that the software that accesses that particular drive has to be aware of the fact that this is the way storage works. That was really sort of the point that I was trying to get to.
It would help if it gave hints, but it's not strictly necessary, because you can infer this based on frequency of access. A simple LRU will get you pretty far. A better hint is often hey, I just read this, but I'm probably never going to read this again. So it was recently used, but seriously, just ignore that it was recently used.
And for what it's worth, IMAP clients already kind of work this way. They expect that there is a separation between the index of the content and the actual content itself, and that when you fetch the content, there will be a delay, right? So I think email is actually a pretty good starting point for this. I'm more curious about, and that'll get in some of these other questions, your other use cases, right? If I wanted to have my website there, right? Yeah, that's a little bit different, because the use cases are not as, you know that the front page is where most of the traffic is, but.
Sure. The other thing is most personal websites,
low traffic.
low traffic and like not that much storage.
Right.
And the storage follows the same pattern. Like the only thing that's going to be taking up huge amounts of storage is pictures and videos. And those probably have a similar recency effect as email. Like I'm going to look at pictures from the past year way more often than I'm going to look at pictures from 10 years ago.
It depends what videos there are. It turns out, to my surprise, I realized a couple of years ago that the people who buy all the big home NASs are people who just love to take movies off BitTorrent. That's the only use case you can really think of. Why do you have multiple terabytes?
That's not why I have a 12 terabytes.
The 12 terabytes is for archiving Linux ISOs.
Yes,
I assure you.
very strangely named Linux ISOs, okay?
Okay, so if that is true though, okay, then there is really not much of a use case. So the set of use cases is very different from the home video. For one, if you lose it, who cares?
Yeah, and the global file system is deduplicating on a file by file basis for exactly that reason. I see absolutely no reason to store like more than a handful of copies of each individual like stolen MP3 out there. So you can replicate more if it turns out to be popular. Just much more for load spreading. You don't want to saturate. If you got unlucky and happened to host like a really, really popular fragment, a very really, really popular file, you don't want to be like just jamming your uplink 24/7.
Okay, so part of what you're building is that if I find the same MP3 as you do, is that what you just said?
Mm-hmm.
Then you and I will download it in this network that we have here. Upload it in the network that we have here. But there will be no more fragments around than if only I had done that.
Correct. So what'll happen?
But it's also encrypted.
Yes.
Okay.
So the properties are you can't tell anything about the data, but you can tell if someone else has the exact same file as you.
Oh, that's an interesting piece of information.
Yeah, it's,
I'm not sure how to use that, but
there are some theoretical attacks on this, but in general, you know, the file system basically has 3 levels of storage. It has private, which is encrypted with its own key, no deduplication, you know, the normal security properties. It has shareable, which means in addition to it being deduplicated, I can give you a copy of this file just by giving you a hash. You don't even actually transfer the bits from me to you.
Right.
Whereas with private, if I wanted to give you a copy of my private data, I would have to decrypt it locally, set up an encrypted tunnel with you, send it in plain text, and then you would re-encrypt it on your side. And that would actually create a duplicate in the global file system. And so for email, you probably want it to be private. But for, you know, stolen videos, subdirectory, you probably want that to be shareable. And then there's finally public, which obviously is not encrypted.
What are the big kind of question marks, I guess, from a technology perspective, like that you need to understand? Meaning there's different ways you could go, and it all is based upon user patterns, and you don't know how people are going to use it, right? Are there questions like that yet?
I mean, yes, around what apps to package, and especially what apps to package in what order, and how to present them, and how much flexibility, and how you package them, like how many options you want. Do you want to say, like, this is the blog app, it blogs like this, and you take it or leave it, or do you want to expose some knobs? On the technology side, at the platform layer, the kind of biggest open question is how do you know, for my cell phone talking to the device to check my email, that's fine because it happens over the overlay, which can punch through the firewall. But if I want to host a web server, I need to allow 443 in for the blog, for example. Right now, there's an SNI demultiplexer, so you can host multiple apps, but someone still has to get the packets from your router to this thing. And so all routers have this functionality, but most people do not operate it. So my kind of going in theory, my original theory was use UPnP.
Yes.
Which most people, a lot of people end up having enabled because a lot of gaming consoles require it.
I think it's on by default for most routers.
Yeah. So UPnP, the protocol that is so freaking secure that I can punch holes in the firewall for other IP addresses other than my own.
Yeah.
Blocks all ports below 1024 for security reasons. That was not a good day when I just said that. It's like, I believe there was some cursing.
Yeah. Damn it, really?
So I do not know what the current state of affairs is with respect to terms of service for ISPs, but a few years ago when I looked into this, a whole bunch of ISPs would not let you expose any ports outside.
Well, they certainly don't block them. They block port 25 outgoing for obvious reasons. And occasionally they block port 25 inbound because someone didn't know how to write the firewall rule.
And then in the case of Comcast, which was my provider at the time, I actually spent the time to get a definitive answer, which took something in the order of 8 tech support calls with various escalation procedures in it. And finally, you had somebody on the line at 10:30 at night who said, "Oh, I have the answer for you." And it was, you can open up whatever port you want and run personal stuff. You just can't do it as a business.
Yeah,
Because
because they sell business Comcast as well
but
for exactly
see,
that purpose.
See, this thing becomes murky. It's difficult to have a product that depends on these fine distinctions that one ISP may make or may not make.
I mean, I kind of feel like, especially if the big ones kind of have that policy, then you just kind of use the Uber play for the rest.
Yeah.
It's like try to get big enough that by the time they notice you,
They can't
it's
shut
too
you
late.
down. Yeah, and I think I had that concern as well, but I think the business personal use thing is the pretty strong line in the sand that they've drawn. And you'll remember the gaming companies, all of them have to deal with this, right? And they are lucky because they get around it with ports greater than 1024.
They just use your
right?
VP, yeah.
And there's a bunch of other video streaming services and things like that that have, if you have an in-house device that needs to punch out, they have ways to do it.
Although oftentimes those involve bouncing through a cloud endpoint.
Yes.
Which we're trying to avoid here.
Right.
So my current state-of-the-art answer is go figure out the 5 most common routers that people have.
Right.
Scrape their config website, write little scripts that know how to do them, and then say, we need to punch some ports for holes in your firewall. If you want to do that yourself, go do that now and press OK when you're done. If not, we notice that you have a Xfinity mumble router.
Yeah.
The login is admin. Your password is probably admin. If it's not, please type it here.
Right.
And then you hit go.
Yeah, and then it just does it.
Fiddles it.
And then you hope that there's no firmware update that only a third of the fleet got, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can report back if it didn't work.
Yeah.
So you have telemetry. Basically every user turning on is a little bit of telemetry collecting data on that exact question. So.
And you could theoretically allow some of these things to run on other ports that are public, and use UPnP if you really wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, for email you can.
Right.
It
wouldn't be good for your website.
Tragically, SRV records did not take off because then you could just have the SRV record point to the port number. But
Yeah, but for what it's worth, email, that would be totally fine.
Well,
although there's blacklist rules and stuff based upon things coming from weird ports.
Yeah, well, so incoming email on port 25 has to be on 25.
Right.
Right. That's
the way it works.
So you already need that. We also, it runs DNS. So the way the DNS works is there's a kind of global DIN DNS service that this thing is pinging.
Right.
And that then points an NS record at that thing's IP address. So you actually need to forward port 53 in as well, because I'm trying to get all of this traffic off the centralized service and onto this device as fast as possible. So it minimizes the cost of running that central service and decreases the incentives for that central service to do things.
Right.
So, Joe, actually, I would be interested in how do you deliver email? I remember my casual experience a few years ago when I was attempting to send email from a just regular Amazon server. That was very interesting.
Amazon explicitly blocks email.
Yeah, they
will just block all email, and some residential.
Two-thirds made it through.
Oh, I mean, now this must have been a while ago because now they literally just block connections to 25.
So if I send something, so what happens?
Well, one of the big problems you're having is that Amazon's IP space is...
No, not Amazon. It's take the home server.
Well, no, I'm actually... The problem is the same. So it does actually help to point it out. Amazon listed their own IP space on the dial-up list, which is...
Oh, I see.
It's an increasingly misnamed dial-up list, but it's a list of all residential IPs, and they banned their own space. And so that will cause almost every mail server. I'm surprised you even got 1/3 through. But you can also do things like sign up for the DNS whitelist, and so this thing can automatically sign up for DNSWL. It can set up SPF records, DKIM records, and basically all the things I do for my personal email server so that mail gets through.
So the thing we do with UBus is actually something much simpler, and that you have much grander ambitions there. So if I, for example, run a site, our use case is a web app. The web app has a confirmation account, an email account. That's the #1 use case because I'm not trying to do email on the home server.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just we have a little accessory that you can optionally install, and what it does, it basically routes all outgoing email through Amazon SES.
Yeah.
And that is an option.
Which works really nice.
It works very well, but it does not have the same zero knowledge property.
Absolutely, right.
So to that end, what I came up with is I run a TCP proxy on a clean IP.
Okay.
And you connect, your SMPD connects to it, and then tells it the actual SMPD it's trying to connect to here, and then negotiates the SSL connection end to end. So the proxy can't actually see anything. And if the proxy tries to hijack the connection, the certificate will fail.
Okay.
So now the proxy is shuttling bits back and forth but can't see. So that solves the IP issue and solves the privacy problem, but creates a spam cannon. And so my solution there is the big problem is you can't really, if you get like a 10 meg stream going to Gmail, is that one 10 meg picture going to grandma, or is that like 10,000 1 kilobyte spams going to 10,000 Gmail users? It's going to get a super band. And so I was kind of stymied by this for a while until I realized the attacker, the spammer who's pretending to be this device and trying to abuse my proxy, can't control the other end, the receiving end. And the receiving end sends back responses proportional to the number of recipients.
Yes.
So I can throttle based on the number of bytes coming in back, and then rate limit people to, home users basically never need more than 20 emails a day.
Yeah.
And so then you rate limit down, and so it makes it kind of uninteresting for spammers because they go through a lot of work to send 20 emails.
Right. Not worth it.
Hopefully. Only one way to find out.
Yes. Yeah. And you could theoretically, there's all sorts of things you could do around that throttling and, making it smarter over time, right? So it's not like...
Well, it's hard to get smarter over time because you can't see the content by design.
Right.
All you can see is the endpoints.
But you can still know the source and the target, right?
Yes.
And that might be enough.
Yeah,
right?
If you notice this person is sending 20 emails a day to a bunch of different targets, maybe rein them in a bit.
Exactly. And then if you have particular endpoints that like this is a known good. Now granted, they're going to change because they're on home internet connections, something they do. But still, they stay the same generally for months at a time.
Well, the API key stays the same.
Oh, right.
Always,
and then they're even better.
Every time they ping the DNS service, they're telling me who they are.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the other thing you have, the other weapon.
So the impression that I'm getting is that you're working on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of parts into this. Each of which individually is a substantial effort.
The file system is a big piece. Most of the other things, they've been just a lot of small solutions that have to integrate.
You have to integrate, and you have to, once you deploy this, you have to actually keep the stuff running. There's a lot of parts that can fail independently that are really hard to see whether or not they operate as intended.
Yeah, my countermeasures there are twofold. I took a lot of I spent the past 18 years of my life doing big data center type stuff. And so a lot of the techniques that have evolved around automation to manage large fleets of servers with a very small number of people, and a lot of the techniques for deploying software to these large fleets with all their dependencies packaged up in in a way that's manageable. We can leverage those. The kind of techniques that mean 2 people can manage a 50,000 server cluster means that managing a single server probably requires 0.0001 people.
Yeah.
And similarly,
And under certain assumptions, right? If the data centers are a lot, cleaner as an infrastructure than what is on the custom hardware that the cat might have just peed on.
Yeah, if the cat peed, but that's in the burning down the house category. But for the applications, I also took a lot of inspiration from kind of the modern cell phones. So you can usually fix a busted cell phone app by uninstalling it and reinstalling it because the app is read-only.
Yeah.
It has a little writable area that gets nuked, and then your persistent data stays. It's rarely the persistent data that gets corrupted.
Yeah.
And even if it does, you lost a single picture. You didn't corrupt the database, and now everything is busted and nothing works. And so I use the same techniques. The container's root file system is read-only. It has a little config space that gets blown away when you uninstall, and then there's kind of the data.
Yeah.
And so, watching kind of non-technical people and like kind of the mystical approach to fixing problems on their phones, like, all right, you just got to make like whatever mystical things people come up with to do actually work to fix problems.
Remove and reinstall. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like wave a dead chicken over it.
That is a good approach. I like that.
Yeah, and I mean, some like techies hate this, but like it's gonna auto update. There's no choice.
Yeah.
Like, I can't believe we're still having this conversation.
Yeah, it's fine, right? And I think people, like, on balance, when they think about what they're getting, they will like that. That's a good thing.
I mean, the downside is like, you have your favorite email app and like the publisher pushes out a new one. It's like fix 2 security bugs and radically change the UI.
Yes.
It's like, God damn it, don't do
Yeah.
that.
Well, this has no UI, so it's fine.
Well, the email app does,
Right,
right? Like whatever webmail gets packaged up with
So have you decided on that?
Which webmail package?
Roundcube, probably.
Roundcube is the default answer. Moxie was pushing Mailpile as a
Mailpile,
possibility. I don't know. I need to evaluate them and kind of
Yeah.
I need to evaluate them with the
Mailpile
eye of the intended user and figure
Honestly,
out.
has a lot of crossover with what you're trying to do with a completely different approach to the
Mhm.
problem, right? Mailpile solution is run it on your laptop,
Mhm.
right?
Which is fine.
Which
Like
is fine. Yeah.
it works the same.
Yes, but the theory is similar.
Mhm. Yeah, same goal, very different
Very different approach.
ways to
the
get
problem.
there.
And encryption and all that good stuff. Like Mailpile takes that like PGP to the end, kind of.
Well, no, more like they try to do encryption that doesn't involve exposing any sort of PGP anything to
Right.
the user ever,
Right.
because that's a
Because
really bad
damn
idea.
impossible.
Yeah. And kind of skip over, that's obvious to everyone here that, the 64 gig stick and this thing is less than $50.
Yeah.
Like,
Pretty sweet.
and this can run email for like 30 people, no problem.
Yeah.
For 30 like home users,
Yes.
no problem. Like probably 3,000 home
Yeah.
users.
Yeah, it's interesting. I am squarely in the, when we've talked about this, in the target market for this.
Mhm.
Like I would probably put it on my NAS.
Mhm.
Just thinking practically, right? The easiest thing to do. Maybe not on my NAS, but like attached to my NAS for storage. Right?
Yeah, that would be the.
Just get another Raspberry Pi and stick it on the network and tell it there's the NAS for storage. Done.
Yep.
Just for interest, what are you plugging in here?
Oh, that's just the serial console.
Oh, I've never used a serial console with Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, it's not running SSH.
Yeah, easier than
For
SSH,
obvious
exactly.
reasons. And it's actually a pain. I'm starting to make 2 builds, like a dev build and a non-dev build, because the rootfs and the containers are so stripped down that like they don't have any tools. Like you can't ping. There's no ping. Like there's no netcat or telnet, so you can't create TCP connections. And like for security, anything that's writable is mounted no exec, which means I can't even just like download a statically linked binary to storage and then run it. So it's just like, all right.
Yeah, you need dev builds that let you do all the things.
I've successfully secured it from further development.
Well, cool. And for the group of people who will watch this afterwards and read the notes, is there a place where you want people to go if they want to help?
Git.sigbus.net is a GitLab instance that is self-hosted.
Nice.
Although not on a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah.
Because man, that would probably not be very fast.
Well, GitLab, yeah, it's a Ruby Goldberg machine, as we like to call it.
It has its own built-in Redis server.
Yes, it does.
It's like, well, I don't think the Raspberry Pi is going to be up for this.
Yeah. This is what happens when you let Ruby on Rails people go nuts for too long.
But
The Ruby Goldberg
it works
machine.
great.
It's amazing.
And like, they have the omnibus container,
Yes.
and I like Docker ran it,
And then it just worked.
and it was just there.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we put our data here, go
Yeah.
back that up periodically.
Yeah.
It's like, I cannot believe that this
Yeah.
all just
It's
worked.
pretty good.
And then it just updates itself.
Cool. So I'll put that link in.
Get.sigbus.net. I have to sign up.
Yeah. Well, you can look at it without signing up. But if you want to submit,
I think there's an explore, but there you go. You have to go under Blue Stars, then you see Project X /OS and
yeah, Project X was the old temporary name.
Yes.
Sure.
Probably rename that.
Yeah.
So you can see Project X OS, which is the base operating system, and then it runs on x86, either on hardware or on a VM, or it runs on the Raspberry Pi.
Right.
More platforms to come. And then there's the email app, which is kind of my demo app. It's pretty small.
What does the email do? Exactly.
Brings up a postfix server for incoming outgoing mail, postfix server for submission from your laptop for outgoing mail, a spam assassin, and a dovecot for IMAP, and eventually it'll bring up a webmail as well, but that's not there yet. And there's some interesting tricks. Another reason for kind of using these isolated containers is you can kind of do interesting things like the incoming postfix, which is kind of the most exposed piece, and the spam assassin, which is the most dangerous piece because it's like parsing like whatever random stuff people send it. Right. So those are kind of the sketchiest pieces. So what I do is I tear them down and recreate them after each email. Okay. So if you find a postfix exploit and exploit it, like you can see your own mail, your exploit mail, but you can't see any previous mails and you can't see any subsequent mails. They go through similar to spam assassin. Dovecot has to be stateful, of course, so it has to run all the time, but it's also only listening on the private network, so no one on the internet can actually get to it. Yeah. So this actually ends up having like way better security posture than like normally when people host their own. What is the end time of this?
4 minutes, 5 minutes.
Cool. Well, make sure there are any other points.
Actually, no. 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay.
I think you should talk about like just kind of ask about which applications people think make sense.
Yeah. Okay.
After email.
What applications should be next?
So I'm going to give you the perspective of a person who worked at a web hosting company that had an application console. Now, granted, this is different, right? Because this is put it on my server versus put it in my house. But and email wasn't one of the options because that was a separate service.
Sure.
But when it comes to the one-click installer applications, there were WordPress, and then there was everything else, right? And it was not even like close. Like it was WordPress 25x of everything.
You need a log scale to see any of the other ones.
And then the other ones, though, the MediaWiki was actually surprisingly popular. Though I don't think for home use that's going to be popular at all.
Home wikis?
Yeah. Seems like a very odd use case, right?
Someone has vandalized the home wiki.
Right. That's the code of conduct for the home wiki. I don't think that will be particularly popular.
Yeah, certainly blogs is kind of high on the list of secondary things
honestly,
to do. If I was optimizing this for this conference, I would have done blogs first, not email.
Blogs first. I do think there are some interesting like
media stuff.
Yeah, that's a challenge though. I mean, I think if I had to give one that was like would get the most use, media. The
like
problem is
server?
It's also or photo sharing type situations.
Photo sharing's
come up a lot.
Can happen. Like that can reasonably happen.
I think it can happen too. The big issue with that is right now you have Apple with iPhoto and iCloud photos and all that stuff. And you have Google with Google Photos, and they're like the Android ecosystem. And there are some people who choose not to do those things, but almost nobody, right? And there's been a lot of people who have tried. So it's one of those things that it's like,
yeah, the cell phone ecosystem has screwed us again.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, I care. And even then, I have a hard time not just using the Apple one because it's there and easy, right?
Yeah. Certainly that's a common one, but yes, it's also got some pretty substantial barriers in front of it.
I think the addressable market's enormous. The question is, can you actually penetrate that market? I don't know.
Totally. That's like all the conversations that we're having right now are like.
But I think websites you can, because here's the thing: nobody has websites anymore, right? Present company excluded, right? The vast majority of like people who have a house, they just have a phone. They don't have a website, right? The question is, would they even want one?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
That's the next follow up.
So another one we've been considering is, I know a lot of people who have a Nest cam pointed out the front door and are a little creeped out about it, and are like would like other cameras for the rest of the house, but are absolutely not going to upload that 24/7 to Google, including a lot of Google employees, which I find quite amusing. And so having the back end of your security cameras actually in your house and never leaving it, I think would make people much more comfortable about putting a camera looking in their entryway, for example.
Right.
But however, which hardware would you recommend? See, I have be out of time, but I have a horrible Belkin webcam security story, about as horrible as it gets. And I looked around. The best thing I can think of is take another Raspberry Pi and put a camera on top.
Yep. So that's kind of a good hacker solution. I think ideally, in the long term, you would partner with the companies that are consumer electronics companies that make cameras and like don't actually want to, not like Nest that wants to be in the business of running a cloud backend, but the ones that actually don't want to be in that business.
Right.
And so you work with them. In the short term, there are these Chinese webcams, which I'm pretty sure are subsidized by the government to get network implants and behind people's firewalls.
Yeah.
But you can actually flash the firmware.
Yes.
So the same insecurity can be used to secure them.
Yep. Xiaofeng makes a whole.
Yeah. Well, and so a bunch of other companies have knocked them off,
Yeah.
but they just copy the original firmware bit for bit because they don't have the source to it either.
Yeah.
And so, basically starting with that platform and then hacking it and then securing it gets you a dirt cheap, but actually secure platform.
You can buy one of those
I'm under the
Xiaofeng
assumption
cameras,
that,
like
the obvious thing that you just figured out wasn't something that they intended you were going to figure out.
Oh, there's another Chinese company? No, well, maybe. That's an interesting one. There's another, this thing actually assumes that your home network is compromised, period. That's why it creates all the encrypted overlays, even when you're on your home network.
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be less of a problem. Because, you've got that smart TV that you plugged in. Even if that thing wasn't backdoored at the factory, it's never getting a security update ever.
Yeah. The internet of terrible things.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
So the very short summary of my terrible Belkin webcam was that I discovered by pure accident that the camera that I bought from Belkin with a Belkin brand name had a undocumented web interface on it. It shipped off the video to a third party that was not disclosed in the documentation anywhere. And here's the best part. It had a administrator login account that was not documented, that had a password you could find on the web, and that you could not change.
Wow.
Go Belkin.
We may or may not have them as a customer.
It was a third party. It was a third party product that we sold, but it didn't tell anybody that. Also, the copyright notice in the HTML that they put box that they were starting was from 2002.
Wow.
Wow. That's probably when the Linux kernel in there was cut too.